which I'll let Jenny explain to everyone. We have some feedback. Can you eliminate that, Kristen? Okay. So my name is Mark Silverberg. I'm chair of the planning board. I'm going to introduce Jenny Gingras, who is our director of planning, and she'll take you through the new law and how we're going to deal with that. So Jenny, I'll let you take over. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. So as Mark mentioned, my name is Jenny Gingras. I'm the Director of Planning for Westborough, and I just want to let everybody know that this is being televised by Westborough TV, so thank you to Westborough TV, and there will be a recording available on their website afterwards. We also have a virtual component for this, so there will be an audience on a computer that can submit questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions, I just ask that you hold them until the end of the presentation, and I'll take them as I see your hand. So most of you may be familiar with what an MBTA community is, either by watching the news or reading the newspaper, or just hearing about it from the planning board. But essentially, this explains what an MBTA community is. It's defined in Mass General Law. There are 177 MBTA communities that are subject to the new requirements of Section 3A of the Zoning Act in Mass General Law. And you can see here that Westborough is on the map as a commuter rail because we do have a train station. So before I get into really what we're proposing, I wanted to take a step back and talk about why multifamily zoning near transit stations is so important. As I'm sure you've heard again on the news or in newspapers, Massachusetts is in a housing crisis. We're short an incredible amount of housing units, and we have among the highest and fastest growing home prices and rents compared to other states in the country. So because of these rising costs, it's resulted in increased financial pressures and on low and middle income families. And so, it's creating a lot of issues with the housing costs, and it's become a disadvantage as we're compared economically against other states. And then one of the biggest things is the risk of future job growth is moving outside of Massachusetts because of the high costs of living. So the state evaluated what we could do in terms of increasing our housing and really diversifying our housing stock to allow more to be available for people. And so the lack of the zoning for multi-family housing in particular is a barrier for new housing development in Massachusetts. So by allowing multi-family housing to be near transit, we're creating housing in walkable neighborhoods. It's also, a good policy for climate and transportation too. Climate-wise, you're reducing reliance on single occupancy vehicles, so it helps in our larger effort to combat the climate crisis. And then having housing closer to places such as jobs, schools, restaurants, things like that is also very beneficial to a community. Why does Westborough have to do this? So, as I said, we are one of the MBTA communities, so we are required to do this by the state's standards in Section 3A. And we currently don't have any zoning districts that meet the state's new requirements. We don't allow multifamily by right. It's a special permit process in some zoning districts. And the MBTA Communities Act requires you to allow multifamily by right. And when I say that, it still goes through a review by the planning board, site plan review. So it's not as if they just apply for a building permit or even go and start building. It still goes through the regulatory process. We plan to bring this bylaw to the March 2024 town meeting. We technically have until December of 2024 to comply, but to be safe in case there was a modification that needed to be made, we are presenting it at the March 2024 town meeting. One important thing to note, aside from not being in compliance with the state's requirements, if our proposed districts are not adopted, we're not in compliance, we also lose access to several grant funding opportunities, including housing choice grants and Mass Works grants. And those grants we receive millions of dollars from every year for a different infrastructure. And we recently actually just received a housing choice grant for a downtown development plan to take a look at what we need to do down there for the businesses and for traffic concerns. So as MBTA community, again, we're classified as a commuter rail, and that means that we have at least one commuter rail station within the town boundaries, which I'm sure everyone knows where that is. We had 8,334 housing units according to our 2020 census. And so because of that factor, the state has determined through their calculations that to meet the requirements, the minimum multifamily unit capacity would be 1,250. And then the requirements really for any commuter rail community, you have to have a minimum land area of 50 acres for the district. 20% has to be located in the station area, so near the train station. And then you have to have a minimum gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre. So that's a combination of the districts that we're proposing. The gross density has to be the 15 dwelling units per acre. So we looked at many districts, and these were the three that we came up with, and I'll explain them in further detail in the next slides. But again, the things that we looked at, the districts had to total at least 50 acres in size, with 50% of the total acreage comprising of contiguous land. So you couldn't have 1 acre here and then 1 acre on a totally different area. Additionally, 20% must be located within the half mile of the transit station area, and then you can't have a single district smaller than 5 acres in size. So there were a lot of factors to consider when we looked at this. So the first district we're proposing is on Gleason Street, and it's actually currently part of our transit-oriented village overlay district. So it's going to be comprised of 3 parcels, and most of it is the existing Westborough Village, which is a development over there. So the total acreage would be almost 59 acres. The second district is on Turnpike Road. It is Park Westborough, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It actually went through a comprehensive permit through the Zoning Board of Appeals in 2015, I believe. So that housing is already existing. And then the third district that we chose is Arrive. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Arrive. It's an 8-story apartment building. I believe it's been there since the early 70s. So we chose that as a district to be considered for the MBTA zoning. So the next thing we had to do once we chose those districts, we had to look at the metrics for each of them and the zoning parameters that we were going to have. And this also went into the calculation to know if we met the requirements that we needed to for Westborough. And we tried to keep in line with the current development that is there, so you're not, it's far-fetched, but if someone tore down Arrive, for example, and wanted to rebuild, they had similar requirements but we still wanted to be able to meet something that would fit for Westborough. So you can see here that we made the building heights among each district a maximum of 4 stories. The lot sizes are all the same for the requirements in those districts right now. So Turnpike Road, the Park, and then Arrive, they're in the Highway Business Zoning District, which already has a minimum lot size of 15,000 square feet. And then the setbacks, we kept the same as well of what the existing zoning has, along with the parking. You'll notice that the dwelling units per acre is something new. We don't call that out in any of our zoning districts except for the transit-oriented village zoning district. And so for the Gleason Road, we came up with 12 dwelling units per acre. For the park parcel, it's 14 dwelling units per acre. And then for Arrive, it's 40 dwelling units per acre. And that is consistent with what is already existing there. That's where those numbers came from. So this is a bunch of math that was done, but this was the result of the modeling and the calculations to show that we are in compliance with what is required. So you can see the second column has the requirement, and then the column on the far right, based on those 3 districts, has our totals. And that's essentially the closest we could come to complying based on the lot sizes and the density, the units that were already there. So the impact on Westborough, as I mentioned, our current guidelines from the state require a minimum of 1,250 units, and that's based on a 15 units per acre minimum, and then the minimum of a 50-acre district size. So we are complying with that. And as I'm sure you saw with the photos and just knowing the parcels, there's already units and housing built on all of the sites that we chose, and that is confirmed that that will meet the guidelines. So essentially, the zoning will not have a substantial impact, very minimal, if no impact to Westborough due to the existing housing that's already on in those districts. Our thought process was this, and why we didn't choose vacant lots or new areas, was that we wanted more time to evaluate our current zoning so that we can understand Westborough's housing needs, but we still wanted to comply with the state. So we are going to be doing a housing production plan, for example, and I'm currently working on the master plan priorities to review our current zoning and see what really works for us based on lots of factors. So the proposed timeline for the zoning amendment adoption, obviously we're here today on December 5th for the public information session. I will also be giving a presentation to the select board on December 19th. And then I will be submitting the zoning article to the town meeting warrant in January. We should have our first public hearing in front of the planning board in February, and then March will be the annual town meeting when we will take this vote. So now I will open it up to any questions you may have, and I will just also reference that we do have a lot of information on our website, including links to the state's website, where you can find all you could ever want to know on MBTA communities and what their requirements are. And I also included just some helpful information about density calculations and where you can get data on the existing housing conditions in Westborough. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Should I come to the mic?
Yes, please come to the mic.
So I'll do my best to be articulate. So help me out here. The letter and spirit of the law is these towns that have public transportation, could you help us get out of this housing crisis? We're going to kind of force your hand to do something that communities by and large do not want to do, which is mess with zoning. Because as soon as you mess with a zoning next to someone's property, you've got someone who's really upset. And I do apologize if I didn't follow this. A lot of work went into it, and I do appreciate all that. But it sounds like all we're doing is actually changing the zoning, but nothing that's going to promulgate the building of more housing, increasing density, and actually live up to what the state's trying to do. Am I following this correctly?
So we are putting the overlay over existing housing areas. Right now in Westborough.
And kind of shame on the state that they sort of allowed for that, because I doubt that's what they were thinking, is just take existing housing and change the zoning of the housing, but no hammer swinging, no new buildings going up, and any of these things that you have in the pipeline here. Again, I'm just trying to get information. I'm not trying to be confrontational.
I understand.
'cause
I
it sounds
appreciate
like-
your concern,
Yeah,
and I have similar concerns as well. But essentially, we wanted more time to be able to evaluate our zoning, and we are looking at our existing multifamily requirements. We do have, for example, in the highway business zoning district, we allow for multifamily through a special permit process. So we are looking at that and seeing how we could potentially promote more multifamily housing, what's keeping builders from wanting to build multifamily, how we can work with them, and then also other ways to promote potentially green zoning, looking at it's expensive to build right now, so what can we provide to them so that we're getting something out of it as well? And so I totally understand the concerns. We are concerned on our end for meeting the timeline from the state level, and this isn't to say that it couldn't be expanded at a later date. It would still have to go through town meeting, but the planning board's thought, and my thought as the planning director, is that we just need more time to evaluate our zoning. We also have a good amount of affordable housing units in Westborough. The state requires for our subsidized housing inventory that we be at 10%, and we are at almost 12% for Westborough, so we're definitely meeting that standard. Sure.
I'm sorry.
I'll just sit down.
Yeah, I didn't get your name, but
I'm sorry, Eric Wade.
Eric, okay.
Eric,
Sure.
7 Franklin Ave.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's not a public hearing, so you don't have to give us your address, but I just would like to know who I'm talking to. So Jenny pointed out that the town of Westborough is already over our subsidized housing inventory quota for, I think 11% of our housing is classified as affordable. But that doesn't mean we don't recognize the need for more affordable housing. You have to realize this law was passed for 177 communities. Some communities are going to be more affected by this law than others. We're in a situation where 20 years ago, we passed the transit-oriented village, and that was recognized by the state. That was far ahead of its time, and it might be considered a precursor for this, because we created new housing next to the MBTA there. And we've already been through that, and we felt that. Now, the transit village, we can't use that exact zoning because it's a very complicated bylaw. We had to make it by right, and that's a special permit. So the point is, though, that we've created an affordable housing trust. I mean, this town is doing a lot to promulgate affordable housing. I don't think the state has made it clear that it doesn't matter what's on these properties. We can zone any parcel, and it could, as long as it's, as long as the zoning has an average of 15 units per acre, that complies with the law. Now, I recognize that nobody's going to tear down Arrive to build a 4-story apartment building. But if they do, they'd have to put in 20% affordable units, and currently I don't think there's any affordable units in there. So I think that in essence, we are trying to recognize the letter of the law, but still recognize the hard work that this town has done to create affordable housing. Does that help you? I mean, I don't know how else to put that.
It does, it just fell out. And it's, as you all know, and many of you folks go to town meeting, if in the future, when you are more time to look at it, and we go forward without the cudgel of the state making us do it, any change to actually bring about the letter and spirit of what this is envisioning, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, and I know the timeline is a tight
Can you
one.
come to the microphone? I'm sorry.
I know the timeline is a tight one, but it does land on me as a missed opportunity. When we go to town meeting, or you go to town meeting in the spring, you're going to say, listen, the state's making us do this. We come back 2 years later, and we're trying to just do the right thing. You know, earlier today, I looked up what the town put out in the wake of George Floyd's killing, and our commitment to like fix what's broken. And what I would say is what's broken is the zoning, right? Because in the 1920s, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the Supreme Court said, you can't exclude people because of race. So I said, okay, we're not going to exclude people because of race, but what we're going to do is we're going to have single-family home with setbacks and mandatory 2 parking, and we're going to make it, race has nothing to do with it. But the reality is it excludes people because of race, because race and income are correlated. And I would love to see Westborough go above and beyond, and it is great that we've exceeded by a slight percentage the mandatory numbers. I'd also bet if we looked at when those mandatory numbers were set, what was aimed for and what was feasible, you know, like it's that. So I do appreciate all the work that went into it. I'm just trying to make an impassioned plea to like, let's when you come back, because time will allow for it, let's aim bigger than that. Let's undo this that's been set here and baked in, that I am a personal beneficiary of, because I was able to buy a home in this town without anyone raising an eyebrow when I walked down the street, but that's not true for a lot of people. And as I think you did a good job pointing out, the state itself is going to start to suffer from this, as it's just too unaffordable. My daughter, she's a sophomore in college. There's no way she's coming back to Massachusetts to live here, and that's really sad. And so these things do matter. I know that you folks know that. And just, yeah, let's come back and let's aim even higher to have empty parcels, to get reasonable built homes so people like my kids can come back here and live and thrive in this community and benefit the way that many of us do.
Yes, thank you. And I definitely agree with that. And I'm a huge advocate for affordable housing and housing in general. I think we're really suffering as a state, you know, with our housing crisis. So I'd love to talk to you further. You can take my business card, and when we do evaluate it further, we are working on other ways in the zoning, like I said, to implement more housing opportunities and allow a more diverse housing stock. So it's definitely important to us. Are there any other questions? Okay.
All right, this is from Adam Broders. He asks, will there be a public comment timeline?
So when it goes to the planning board, there will be a time for public comment. You can attend the planning board and ask questions or make comments at that time at the planning board meeting. You may also submit questions or comments to my office, and we can certainly answer them if we can ourselves, or submit them to the planning board to be answered at the planning board meeting.
And the date for that meeting is?
We don't have a date finalized yet, but it will be posted on the website. It will most likely be the first meeting in February.
All right. The next question is from Prashant Ahuja. Is there any additional spending required, financial impact, to perform this rezoning based on the current plan?
No, there's no financial impact for us as a town. There's no money to be spent on this, aside from staff time, of course, for the zoning.
All right, and then the next question is from Adam Broders again. One of the intents is to reduce single-user vehicles. 2 of these districts virtually require single-user vehicles or traversing Route 9. As you look at the plans in the future, will you also be looking into resolving this? Perhaps comment on the plans for Otis Street due to the changes to accommodate Amazon and how this interacts.
Yes, thank you, Adam. That's a good question. So we are working on a trail system that's a 9-mile trail system to connect Westborough to the adjacent communities. It's called the B-Walt, and there is more information on the Planning Department's website about that. But essentially, that would connect many of those areas to other areas throughout town, either by walking or bicycling. It will essentially be a multi-use trail.
That's the last question.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience have any questions? No? Okay. No other questions online? You sure? That was really quick.
Hi, I'm Greg. Simple question. If I remember back far enough, that for the central of the 3 districts, there was the Rive and there was the one in the middle off of Route 9. I recall badly at number 2, that there was a request by the fire department that access be improved to that location, because otherwise the emergency response to that location was to go out to the turnaround loops on Route 20 and Route 9, go past and then come back. Has that ever, I'm just curious, this is kind of like outside of planning, but it is kind of planning. It's like, was that ever addressed, and does that have any impact on this designation?
So this doesn't have any impact on that. That project did receive their certificate of occupancy, which does involve review from all of the departments, including the fire department. So I'm not sure on the details of that, but they would have signed off on that.
To comment on that, that was a 40B project and actually was approved by the ZBA, not the planning board. So I don't know exactly the details for you on that, but I do know that, I do recall that issue when the project was built, and I believe they were able to satisfy the fire chief at the time that the trucks could get in there and get adequate access. It was just making that trip down to Route 20 and doubling back that would slow the response time. So.
And that does bring up a good point that I think I briefly mentioned, is that if there were any projects proposed in any of these districts, they would still go through site plan review at the planning board, which would be a public process. It still gets published in the newspaper, so abutters are invited to come to the meeting or get information online. So there is a notification process still. It's the use that's allowed by right, and then the planning board would take a look at the site to make sure it meets all of the public safety requirements and then other environmental requirements as well. Go ahead.
Hi. Could you go to the slide that had specifically I remember the one that had the 2 cars per property? All right, so this is basically something that was created and then laid over those 3 districts. I know that,
It's what is existing as well.
yeah. Oh, and so it fits, like what's there fits into that. So this is already well, kind of quote unquote in the can. And then could you go to the slide that has your 3 circles? But keeping in mind the time constraint, could there not be a 4th circle that would be a place that doesn't have already built out to capacity, where this could then also be somewhere? Now, I know this would put us beyond what strictly is required by the state, but I'll go back to my earlier point. Yeah, that's actually a good thing. I fear that if each of the towns in this MBTA communities thing does this, we're not going to get anywhere near what they were actually hoping to bring about because of this. And I know that each town's different and the culture of the towns are different, but a really interesting thing happened with the talk I went to about the hurricane. There used to be 150 dairy farms here in Westborough. The idea that like the drawbridge is pulled up and the way the town is now is how it has always been and should always be, of course, is something I believe we should, as residents, disabuse ourselves. I know it might be hard to find that. You guys know much better than me, but it wouldn't require anything different other than like, well, over here, there's these 6 plots, and then if someone's gonna build on them, they could have a little higher density per acre. Is that a
Yeah,
possibility?
understood. We did evaluate many parcels. It was a little difficult to find a vacant parcel that still met all of the requirements. The percentage that had to be near transit, had to be a contiguous area, et cetera. So we did evaluate other parcels. And I will mention that there are a couple of multifamily proposals in under the planning board right now in open hearing. So I would encourage you to definitely tune in on those. And then we are doing a downtown master plan and evaluating the housing in the downtown, really considering that, you want a walkable community, a place where you can live, work, shop. So part of that downtown development plan will be taking a look at the housing opportunities as well. So we are evaluating other places, but it's a little difficult based on the parameters for the state's guidelines to find an area that's vacant and still meets all the parameters.
Wouldn't though you have already met the state's requirement by doing this, and then while you're at it, is it possible to take this like mindset, which is higher density, and pop it in some other places? I've been coming before town meeting and asking for a change in zoning while we're at it with the leverage from the state. The time is like strike now,
So Eric, can I comment on that?
Please,
'Cause
yes.
there's a couple of issues there. Right now, there's a sewer moratorium on any new sewer, residential sewer connections. So any new projects would either have to have private sewer until we figure out what the solution is for our sewer capacity. The other issue is, we have a lot of districts that allow for multifamily zoning. Highway business, all along Route 9 allows for multifamily zoning. The downtown planning overlay allows for multifamily zoning. So if we solve that sewer issue, we have zoning in place that allows for multifamily zoning and has a 20% affordable requirement. The town has passed 20% inclusionary zoning over all of our residential zones, right? The only reason those zones don't comply is because they're special permit as opposed to by right, right? It gives us a chance to take a closer look and make sure that any proposals in those zones are the best proposals for the town of Westborough. And we chose these parcels because we didn't want to give up that special permit authority. And we felt that we already have zoning in place that allows for plenty of multifamily development if someone can meet that sewer, if we can solve that sewer problem, okay?
Adam Broder has one more question. There are no crosswalks on Route 9 to get from Arrive to the train station. This applies to the Park Apartments. They have no sidewalk to get along Route 9 to Otis Street. Is there a plan to improve the safety of crossing Route 9? I understand this may not be related to zoning, but affects the effectiveness of this zoning change.
Yeah, I can. So we are looking at transportation in Westborough overall, and not just for vehicular traffic, for pedestrian and bicyclists also. In fact, one of the things that I'll be asking for at town meeting is to budget for an assistant planner that would focus in on transportation initiatives. because we do feel that that's really important, and we need to take a bigger picture look at what we need, including the need for crosswalks. I mentioned the B-Walt trail system that we're planning, and there's more information on the website for that. So it's definitely a consideration we're looking at, and I would encourage him to reach out to us directly or reach out to our Active Transportation and Safety Committee and just relay those concerns or comments there, and I'd be happy to take a look at them.
Just specifically to address Otis Street, the town recently received, I think, $4 million in grants from the MassWorks grant program that we would not be eligible for if this zoning doesn't pass. But that is supposed to improve Otis Street from Route 9 down to the Smith Parkway with a side path that there'll be crosswalks in appropriate places. There'll be a side path is basically a bikeable sidewalk. So you can have bikes and pedestrians running all the way up and down Otis Street to get to the train station. We also asked Amazon, when they built those new buildings, for an easement that will take us from Otis Street up to Park and the Target ball fields. Now, that easement, probably a long way before we can actually consider biking that, because that's, we'll have to get another grant for that, right? But we do have the easement in place so that Park can get connected to downtown without having to do that whole rigmarole with Route 20. So I think it's a long-term solution, I understand that. But we're working on solutions that will improve. The other thing I forgot to mention, the state is putting a new bridge over the railroad at the end of Fisher Street. So everybody at Westborough Village and everybody from Park once we get that easement and access from Park down to the train station, they'll be able to go over that Fisher Street bridge, bike to downtown. We've already got a grant for half of Fisher Street, a shared streets grant that will put another side path along Fisher Street and improve the bikeability along Fisher Street. So we're getting there. I mean, all of this is going to take a long time. We're probably talking 10, 20 years before it's all done. And I hope I'm still, God, if I'm still on the planning board, you guys. So.
Adam's last comment is thank you for all the efforts and the hard work you do.
Last chance for questions or comments, and you can still submit them to me after this meeting. I have some cards here that you can grab one of my cards and send me an email, and if you think of anything afterwards, feel free to send it. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone attending.